Okay, good morning. Today is the 10th day of the second Adar, the 20th of March. We're up to the fourth reading of Vayikra. And in the fourth reading, we're going to take a verse that says something that we already saw a couple of times in this parsha, but we can't do everything in the same. This topic appears again and again, so we had to do it somewhere. So we did it here on this fourth reading. We're reading from Leviticus 3, 2. I'll start one verse earlier. If a sacrifice is a peace feast offering, Zevach Shlamim Korbano. Shlamim is a peace offering. And what it does, what it's meant to do, is it promotes peace in the world. How does it do that? Because it promotes commonality among all the participants in the sacrificial rite. The offerer, the priest, and the altar by allotting portions of its meat to each. Meaning this is the type of sacrifice that people would eat from. Not just the priests, which was usually their right to receive a certain portion of the animal. Not in a burnt offering. In a burnt offering, the only thing the priest receives is the skin, unless I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if it's a burnt offering brought by a non-Jew, then the priest doesn't receive anything, not even the skin, not even the hide of the animal. And this peace offering, shlamim, its name shlamim even comes from the word shalom, it means peace, is eaten by everyone. The person who brings it, the priests, and the altar also receives a piece. And this is the type of offering that people would bring a lot of times in order to sanctify their feast, meaning, in other words, they would have a simcha, they would have a family affair, they would have a wedding or a bar mitzvah, whatever it was, and they'd bring one of these sacrifices so that the food would be sanctified in that sense, meaning that the meat that was eaten, you don't just bless the regular blessings, you also make a blessing that you're eating from a sacrifice. Now, one of the reasons to choose this is really an individual type of sacrifice. I don't believe there's any communal sacrifice that is a shlamim, that is like of this type. I might be mistaken, but I think that this is it doesn't make sense actually that it would be communal, because it's supposed to be eaten by the person bringing it. In any case, in the second verse, it says something. Again, this is common to to all the sacrifices, all the individual sacrifices. When a person brings an individual sacrifice, in this case, this peace-promoting feast offering, if he brings it from cattle, it must be male or female, it must be unblemished, he must bring it before God. And then, just before it's slaughtered, he must then lean his hand forcefully upon the head of this sacrifice, and slaughter it, and then you slaughter it. So the leaning of the hands is like you place the hands on the head of the sacrifice and you push on it. What is that? So if you might know this as laying the hands, but when you hear laying the hands, it's much weaker than leaning the hands, because you have to lean into it. You have to push down. There's an interesting thing here that this became the topic of the first dispute that the Sanhedrin could not solve. This is the first question that was brought before them that they could not give a clear, concise answer to. And the Mishnah tells us in the third chapter, in the second chapter of Chagiga, and the chapter starts with the following. So listen to this. It actually starts with the basis of what we call the inner teachings of the Torah in the Mishnah. And it's actually the only time in the Mishnah that this is mentioned. And it says like this: one may not expound on the Torah's forbidden sexual relations before 3 or more individuals, meaning only before 2. No, there are certain things that you can't teach in public, or at least originally it was this way, that you could not teach this on public because these are topics that are too sensitive. Nor on the accounts of creation before 2 or more individuals, nor on the workings of the divine chariot before even a single individual. unless that individual is wise and understands on his own. In other words, the secrets of the Torah originally were only given from a master to a teacher, and from a master to a student. And the student had to be someone who, by hearing just the outline, would be able to fill it in by themselves. Whoever looks at four matters, it would have been better for him that he had never entered the world. What is above, what is below, what was before, and what will be after. This is a very interesting Mishnah because it's saying that there are four questions that if you ask them, it's better that you not enter the world. Which is like to say, you may as well not have been born. But it's not so simple, because these are actually very important questions that are asked. So what does it mean that it would have been better for him never to enter the world? That needs to be discussed elsewhere. And anyone who has no concern for the honor of his Creator deserves to have never come into the world. Now, the second Mishnah starts like this. Yossi ben Yoezer says, the hands should not be placed, meaning on the head of the animal sacrificed before slaughtering it. And Yosef ben Yochanan says the hands should be placed. Well, obviously they're not saying whether they should be placed at all or not. They're rather saying in certain circumstances. Which circumstance are they talking about? They're talking about when someone brings like a peace offering on a festival day. There's a question of something, is it permissible or not to lean the hands on the head of the animal? Why would it be permissible or not permissible? In any case, these two people, Yosef ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yochanan, who says the hands should be placed, they are considered the very first pair. And by pair we mean that they were disputants. They studied by intellectually challenging each other. This was not something that was very common before, and certainly not at the level where they couldn't come to an agreement. And here there was one opinion and then another opinion, and they never came to an agreement. Just what do we hear? The Yosef ben Yoezer says you should, and Yosef ben Yochanan says you can't. I said it backwards, but you get the idea. Yoshua ben Prachia says the hands should not be placed. Nitai Arabeli says the hands should be placed. And then we go through a whole series of pairs of sages, and each one has each pair. One says that you should place it, the other says that you shouldn't place it. Now, what do we want to do with this? The question, first of all, is why would it not be permissible? The answer given by most of the Rishonim, most of the commentaries on the Mishnah and the Talmud is that it's a question about whether you're allowed to use an animal on a festival, whether you're allowed to make use of the animal. What does it mean to make use? Now we're getting to the crux of what it means to bring a sacrifice, and we need to understand why we want or don't want a temple. What is the sacrifice about? The sacrifice, we said, is about feeling that it should have been me being sacrificed. The problem is that takes a great deal of imagination, and not just imagination, but one would say it's almost to vicariously feel yourself being slaughtered is not something that people can really do. They may be disgusted by an animal being slaughtered, but they don't feel that it's themselves. Most people just look at it and that's it. It's nothing. The act of leaning the hands on the head of the animal is meant to, as it were, to infuse my soul into the animal. And it's a very powerful thing if you do it properly. Meaning it's an act of bonding with the animal. And if you remember one of the 4 verses that we talked about, we didn't have a chance to discuss it in length, but one of the 4 verses we talked about regarding the sacrifices, the Adam, why it says an Adam from amongst you who should bring a sacrifice and not an Ish, was Adam uveimat oshei Hashem. Man and animal you shall save, O God. And the idea is that the animal and man bonds in the temple. There's a bonding of the souls. And so when you lean your hands on the animal and you're infusing part of yourself into it, then that means you will have a real experience of being slaughtered when the animal is slaughtered. And it's a very powerful experience there. So this is what's needed. And the question is, can you do this on a festival or not? So is it really something that is permissible? Because we have, on a festival day, we're not allowed to use animals in any way. So is this called using the animal? The word for leaning on the head of the animal is smicha, v'samach. Smicha is also the same word that we use for ordination. When we ordain a person as a sage, as a scholar, as a rabbi, as one would say today, even though our ordination today is not like that, but the idea behind ordination is exactly the same idea. That the teacher is imparting part of his soul on the student. He's giving part of himself into him. And that is what keeps the ordination going. In other words, that Moses was ordained, let's call it, by God, and Moses then ordains 70 elders, and he ordains Joshua, and they continue the ordination. We don't have ordination today. Why do we not have ordination today? Because it was finished at some point in the 2nd century. It was cut off. The chain was cut off. And one would say, why would it be cut off? Why can't you just continue with it? Apparently it couldn't be continued because the spiritual force that's needed to give from the teacher to the student was missing, meaning they tried to ordain, they tried to do that act, and nothing happened. It wouldn't work. People were not affected by it. The student was not affected by it. They didn't feel that this is what was passing between the teacher and themselves. There was something missing. And so it wasn't a technically impossible thing to do. They could do it technically, but something was missing. So today we say, in all those things that we need to be ordained, and we're not. No one is ordained today, even though, again, we call it ordination in the modern world, and in the medieval world it was called ordination, but it's really not the same thing. So in all those things we say shlichutayu dekamai ka'avdinan. We say we're performing the tasks, meaning the mission given to us by our elders. In other words, we pass the ordination. Instead of ordination, we say we're messengers, we're emissaries. The previous generations gave us the task, they told us to continue on, and we're performing their shlichus, their tasks that they entrusted us with. And that's how we get around this problem today. But because of that, we don't do many things. One of the things that we can't do, for instance, is damages, nezik. Anything that has to do with damages in a court, a Jewish court today cannot rule on, because it says that to decide the amount of damages and the extent of damages that one party needs to pay to another, you have to have ordination. And it's not enough to just be a messenger. Another thing that we don't do, we don't sanctify the new moon. So we use a calendar that was calculated sometime after the ordination ended. But in order to live in a calendar that's alive, that is looking at the moon and then deciding when the first of the month is, for that you need ordination. Why do all these things need ordination? We'll just say one word and with this end. Because this is what's called, ordination gives what we call in Chassidus derher. This Yiddish word means sense or feeling. It's related to dat. It's not enough, I'll say it like this. If a person has already been a student by a scholar, by his teacher for many years, and he already has learned everything he has to learn from him, why does he have to receive ordination? Because ordination is the giving of the inner sense about things. the teacher, the master is giving some of his inner senses, derrière, into the student so that he has a feel for certain things which cannot be decided upon intellectually alone. The intellect is only a precursor to these decisions. And this is the connection here to the inner teachings of the Torah. All of the inner teachings of the Torah, when somebody says, so how did you intellectually come to this? The answer is not so easy, because I didn't come to this intellectually. This is an inner sense that the scholars of the inner dimension of the Torah had. They have an inner feeling, like an intuition inside of them that these things are correct. So with this we'll end today. It's a little bit of an excursion into the topic of both leaning the hands and the same word which also means ordination in Hebrew. Thanks for joining.